Well, hello. Welcome back to Curlis Mania, where we talk
Woo!
all things pop, rock, and prog. Although I've been heavy on the prog these days, and there's nothing wrong with that. Um, I welcome back to the channel. Thanks for tuning in. I have a special guest for you again, and today I am very honored to have for the first time on the channel. His name is Scott Davis. How you doing, Scott?
I'm doing real fine, Tom. Thanks for having me on here. I am just pleased and proud, and I'm very happy to be here to talk about a couple of my very favorite records from one of my very favorite bands. So thank you for this opportunity. I'm very excited.
Oh, absolutely. I'm so psyched to have you. We met on the Prog Corner, I think was the first time we
Yeah.
interacted. So
Yeah, and
um
then I went and watched everything on your channel essentially. So
oh man, that's awesome. Thank
some
you.
good
That's great.
stuff. Some good I particularly liked the most recent one. That you just ran. Oh, the one before it with the two Rush albums was very well done. A lot of
Oh.
great points on that one. I really liked that one, and then also the most recent Marillion one was really good. I'm
Mhm.
My Marillion knowledge is more limited, obviously, than you and I forget your guest name on that show. I'm sorry.
Eric Porter. Yep.
Eric, thank you, Eric,
Yep.
of course.
Yep.
My Marillion knowledge is much more limited. I bailed on Marillion after the first, two or three albums, and I've been playing catch up more recently. So it was very helpful. So yeah, I've been
Yeah.
enjoying your channel.
Good. I'm so glad. I'm so glad to
Yeah,
hear that. It makes me
yeah,
happy.
yeah.
Um, we Scott really knows his stuff, man. And he like I said, he was on the Prog Corner not too long ago. He also has a band called Myth of Logic. So if you're into checking out original music that's prog, you know, basically modern prog, go check out Myth of Logic. So there's a couple records. I think there's two albums out, right? And there's a third one coming out. Is that
Yeah, I've got two albums. The first one was released in November of 22, and that is Surrounded by Ghosts. That's the first of the Here and There trilogy. The second one came out New Year's Eve of this last year. That's Pictures from a Previous Dream. I'm trying to keep the glare off here, and I'm not succeeding very well. But anyway, like I said, we're calling it the Here and There trilogy, and the third part will be out this fall. I've got a release date of September 15th, and I'm madly and feverishly working on it as we speak. I'm in the middle of tracking, so
Nice, nice,
yeah.
beautiful. I'm looking forward to it because I've been listening to your stuff and I'm loving it. So if you're into prog at all, check it out. Myth of Logic.
Thank you.
Check it out. But we are here to talk about another band, and that is I'm giving it away on my shirt. One of my, probably my favorite band of all time. If it really comes down to it, Rubber Beats the Road, I think Genesis is my favorite band of all time. Um, and Scott reached out and said, "Hey, how about a Genesis battle?" And I was like, "Of course, Genesis battle. Nope, let's do it. When can we do it? Let's schedule it immediately." Um, so we are here today to talk about two records, 1978, and then there were three versus 1980 Duke. This is when Genesis got down to a trio, and they had to make it work, and man, did they make it work. Um, and but more on that later. So this is the battle today, and I'm just going to do a quick, like I always do, I'll just do a quick history, a little backstory going into these albums, just to give you a little bit of context. And I'm going to start when Peter Gabriel drops the bomb on the Lamb Lies Down tour that he's leaving. So they all look at each other and go, "Oh no, what? You're what? You're what? You're leaving the band? What?" And they try to, Tony does his best to try to talk him out of it, but his mind is made up, and he decides that he'll finish the tour, but once the tour is over, he's out. He's going to do his own thing. So that kind of sounds some alarm bells in everyone's heads, of course. And probably most of all, Steve Hackett. I think he was the first one to say, "Uh-oh, this band could be over if Peter's not in it." So he quickly does a solo record in 1975 called Voyage of the Alkalite. And it's an excellent record. And in the meantime, Phil, Tony, and Mike start writing new material, and they already get the bare bones of Dance on a Volcano and things like that. Um, just the three of them working together without Steve. Um, which is kind of a thing, premonition of things to come. So Steve finally gets back, doesn't have much material because he just made a solo record. So he's just kind of throwing in riffs and things here and there. He has a couple of ideas, um, but they end up making Trick of the Tail, which is a very successful record. They tour it, very successful tour. And then they know that they're going to survive as a band. They can breathe again. They go to the Netherlands and make Wind and Wuthering, which is another great record. I actually did a battle of if you look, yeah, look at my channel. There's a battle. Wind and Wuthering.
That's my album. That is my Wind and Wuthering is my apex for Genesis. I adore that record. Everything about it.
That's so
Yeah.
I'm so happy to hear you say that
Yeah.
because on that battle that I did, we did Trick of the Tail versus Wind and Wuthering. Both of us picked Wind and Wuthering because
Yeah.
that album to me is just like a grower, and once it gets under your skin, you're just in.
Blood on the Rooftops. Oh my God. Blood
Yeah,
on the Rooftops. Ugh.
yeah,
I mean, the entire album evokes that reaction for me, that subtle, oh, I mean,
yeah, yeah.
it's such a it's a perfect album. There are perfect Genesis albums. That's a perfect album in my view.
Yeah, I love that album. I mean, and to
I
me,
love
that's
it.
the most that Hackett ever got on a Genesis album. And
Yeah, which is
and
ironic because
it is
that's the
ironic.
last one he did.
It's the last one, but it's the most he ever contributed, and I love things like In That Quiet Earth for me is like,
Oh,
I just love that. Oh my,
yep,
and
yep,
like I even 11th Earl of Mar. I mean, don't get me started. That's
yeah, yeah.
talk. Check out the other episode. I go crazy on
Right there with you.
yeah. So anyway, so they make this great record. They go on tour for Wind and Wuthering, and then they're mixing this album, which is the live album from that tour, and Steve doesn't show up. In fact, Phil sees him on the street and says, "Hey, Steve, hey, I see, man, I'm in a jump in the cab, or we're going to the mixing session. Come on." And he's like, "No, no, it's okay. No, I'll catch you later." And he's like, "What? What do you mean catch me later?" And then and he doesn't show up basically. And they said, "Oh, haven't you heard? He just said he's leaving." So Phil's like, "Oh, he didn't tell me that. Okay." Hmm. So anyway, so that and then what happens is they tour or sorry, then they make that they're heading into that's it. So they have the Seconds Out comes out. It's a very successful live record, and they head, I think it's the same studio again to go back to make the next record. And that ends up being, and then there were three. So I'm gonna hand it over now to Scott and get your impressions on, first of all, two things. One, what is your introduction? I always like to hear like when was the first time you heard the record and what was your first impression, and then jump into your analysis of the album. So
Well, let me start off with a little Genesis history, just very briefly. I'm going to try and be as brief as I can, but as informative as I can. My journey into Genesis fandom was very convoluted. It started when I walked into a record store in Lexington, Kentucky, where my dad was living after my parents were divorced. And I saw this.
oh yeah,
And I was like, what is that? Look at that.
such
That's
a
the
cool
most
cover.
that's the most amazing photograph I've ever seen. And I flipped
Yeah.
it over and I said, side three, one song, supper's ready. I just went, okay, take my money. So I
Sheer
gave my money.
curiosity, right?
Yeah, and I went
Yeah,
home, and that is still in my brain. That's still a definitive version of supper's ready. I know that
yeah.
people are getting their pitchforks ready. I
It's
have come
good.
to
It's good.
I have come to sincerely appreciate Peter Gabriel and his approach and everything he did, and the fact that Seconds Out would never have been possible without all the things that Peter did to get the band to that point. That's
Right.
absolutely true. But
Right.
that was my entree was Seconds Out. I would like to point out a couple of things about Genesis that I think play into this particular battle. To me, of course, Genesis is divided primarily into the two eras, the Peter Gabriel era and the Phil Collins era. But I don't think it's the vocals that truly separate that. In the Peter Gabriel era, the majority, not always, but the majority of the lyrics written were first person because Peter was playing roles, he was playing parts, he was speaking from the point of view of the characters that he was playing. So the lyrics were usually in first person. After Peter leaves, suddenly the lyrics, the majority are in second and third person, where you're talking directly to someone or you're talking to someone about somebody else. So I think that's the clear delineation between those two eras, and is that lyrical content and how in general it changed that way. Also, I genuinely feel like there's a comparison to be made, and not just overall, but particularly in this era, the pivotal areas of both Yes and Genesis. When every musician who's been in Genesis has to find a way around the Banks sound. In the same way that in Yes, every musician, in my opinion, had to find their space around the Chris Squire sound because it's so big and so commanding. And it was the forceful masculine part of the Yes music was that bass sound, not just the Rickenbacker, but the Taurus pedals as well, that entire picture. In Genesis, I feel like that presence was more Tony, not just his writing style and dominance, but the sound. I think the sound of each record as we went along in the history of Genesis was dominated and dictated a lot by the instruments that Tony would use. And he went through a lot of instruments. He's never really stuck with anything. He was constantly changing things up. A discovery that I made about both the albums we're going to talk about today is that I found that they both sound much better to me at lower volumes than I typically monitor. I was a little bit astonished to discover that. I typically monitor in my workshop. I have a guitar and amp repair business, and I put music on in my workshop and let it roll. And I tend to monitor fairly loudly in there most of the time. And then there were three sounds much better than I used to think it did. It still doesn't sound as good as Duke, but I found things about it that I liked much better. Um, anyway, we're on to and then we're three. Hope that didn't go on too long.
No, that's great. Perfect.
Released March 31st, 1978, produced by David Henschel and Genesis. I feel like and then there were three is the sound of a band with an established method and identity searching for a way forward. They have established writing and playing patterns that you can still hear from previous albums, but they're testing the waters, they're pushing some boundaries, they're trying to move forward, they're getting Phil more involved in all aspects of the record making process, not just writing, but playing and composing, and rightly so because he's a talent. I think that Phil, quite frankly, is under recognized when discussions are undertaken about the great musicians in not just prog but rock. I mean, what an absolutely fabulous drummer, so much feel, so much soul. If you really sit and listen to a song we're going to talk about a bit later, Follow You, Follow Me, which on its surface is just a pop tune, there's so much going on in just the bed track of that. There's soul and swing about the drums and the percussion that you really need to pay attention to. It's very subtle. Anyway, on this album, Tony was using an ARP 2600. He's still using the Hammond T102 organ, which he used through all of the band's previous work. He had a Roland RS-202. He also had a Polymoog, which played into the sound of this album. It was a very dark sounding synth, but it was thin as well. Also, this was the entrance of the Yamaha CP70 electric piano, which no
Love that
one,
sound. I love that.
other than Eddie Jobson, no one has utilized that sound as properly and to the fullest as Tony Banks, and he does it well here. And apparently they brought in a Steinway Grand for some stuff towards the end for, I think it was The Lady Lies.
Yeah.
Anyway, first song is Down and Out. First time I heard Down and Out, I thought the record was messed up. Turns out it's just in 10/8. Now that I know that, I hear it and I feel it. I went, what the hell is that? I thought it was broken. Um, Something I'd like to point out about the sound of it and the sound through Phil's entire career, and something I like to put on my own records, his ride cymbal sound, no matter how much is going on or how gated the toms are or whatever, he's got that ride cymbal that's just wide and wonderful and tasteful with what he does. I love that sound.
Mhm.
Um, the band got better at marrying lyrics to music as time went on. This one, they kind of cram a lot of words in a furious state. It doesn't really detract from the song, mainly because I'm so used to it. Banks does some absolutely fantastic soloing throughout, as he usually does when he decides to add that sort of thing. I really like the guitar sound on this track. It's really tough and stratty. Mike was really his guitar sound is much more present in the mix than I initially thought it was once I really paid attention. And he's got this great Stratocaster crunch to it. That song, by the way, was written by all three of them. Undertow is a Banks tune. Beautiful song. Absolutely beautiful. I love this song. It's one of
Love
my
it.
favorite Tony songs ever. Excellent vocal from Phil. Lovely dynamic that shifts between the sections of the song, and it's mixed very well. Ballad of Big was written by all three of them. It's a story piece in the vein of All Our Mouse's Night or One for the Vine. It could have come from Wind and Wuthering. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
as a lot of the songs on this album, if you listen to them closely, you can see they were still clinging to that early era just a little bit. I know a lot of people think that this album is not worthy of the Genesis heritage, but I'm telling you, there's an awful lot of fantastic roots in earlier stuff in this album if you give it a chance. Snowbound, another absolutely fantastic song that I thought Banks wrote. That's a Rutherford song.
Yeah, it's a big song, yeah.
Beautiful song. Another one that could have been on Wind and Wuthering very easily.
Mhm.
Lovely entangled style guitars. I mean, I just love Entangled, that swirly three guitar thing that they got going from time to time
Oh,
on
yeah,
Supper's Ready and other places. But Entangled, I think, is where they perfected it. It was awesome.
yeah,
You hear some of that on Snowbound. They nicely modulate to the refrain, and the drums are very old school, big reverb, not gated reverb.
yeah,
They got this very big, huge room going on,
yeah,
and that's
those
a lot.
choo, 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 choo.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. It's
yeah.
not gated yet. They haven't
Not
gotten to that
gated, but
point. Not
almost,
yet.
yeah.
Yeah. Then we have Burning Rope, another Banks tune, typical Banks, big, romantic, ballsy gem.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah,
Fantastic drum work in the intro and throughout. The lyrics are mostly second person, as is their practice, I feel, after Peter left. Wonderful soloing from Rutherford. He really his when Rutherford's lead work is more composed, I feel like he's more comfortable. When he tries to improvise, as he does later in this album, and I'll talk about it, it's not as successful as Steve. Steve was the better improviser, I feel, when it came to lead stuff. But Mike
yeah.
on Burning Rope, Mike really shines. It's a big melodic statement that he makes with his lead work, and it's wonderful.
Mhm.
Deep in the Mother Lode, which is in my top three of Genesis tracks all time. I love that song. Taurus pedals, baby. That's
Yeah,
all you need to
totally,
know.
totally.
Man, I if I spent a lot of my formative years as a bass player, and I was emulating Geddy Lee in my early years, so I had Taurus pedals, and
Horse pedals, yep.
there's nothing like hitting the low C on that thing and watching the beer glasses work their way off the tables.
It's a
I
thing,
love it.
it's a vibe,
It is a
yeah,
thing. Yeah.
yeah,
The lyric in Motherlode is wonderful. I love it. It's very evocative and talks about, the quest for more, the journey to a better life, and how that sometimes doesn't pan out. It's got a bit of a squonk feel about it.
mhm,
If you listen to the two songs one after another, they're quite similar. I love the middle section. It quiets down real smoothly and then comes roaring right back. Lots of lovely weird time signatures. They flirt with 9 and 6 and 13 and wind their way back. And that's one of the Genesis traits, I think. Many Too Many, another
Deep in the
Banks
Motherlode.
tune.
Sorry, Scott. Deep in the
Oh, that's
Motherlode.
good.
Is that a Mike song?
I'm sorry. Deep in the Motherlode is a Mike
It's
song. That's
Mike. I just wanted
correct.
to confirm that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Got
Yeah,
it.
I'm sorry. Many Too Many, that's a Banks tune, prototypical Banks, majestic, romantic. Uh, I feel like Mike should have spent a little more time on the lead work, particularly on the fade out.
Yeah.
It just sounds a little bit like it's not quite there, Mike. Maybe you should have gone back, but that's a minor niggle in an otherwise beautiful song. Uh, Phil's vocal in particular is, fantastic.
Oh, his
That's a
vocal's so good on that song. I know. So
that's
good.
another thing Phil never gets credit for is what a fantastic rock singer he was
Yeah.
blossoming into. I feel
Totally.
like the one differentiating factor between Three and Duke, one of the biggest factors is it was Phil's coming out party as a vocalist. He acquired so much power and so much confidence and range and fearlessness to
Yeah.
evoke emotion. And it really came through on this album, but I think much more later.
Yep.
Let's see here. We're up to Scenes from a Night's Dream. That's a Collins Banks song.
Mhm.
It's okay. It seems a little forced in spite of Phil just giving a heroic drum performance in spite, and the vocals are awesome. I don't hate it, and I don't skip it when I listen to this album, but that's the runt on this album. It really kind of doesn't stand up with the rest of the album for me,
Okay.
uh, but it just sounds like it was a little rushed and maybe should have been developed a little bit more.
Yep.
But like I
Yep.
said, it doesn't spoil it for me.
Okay.
Say It's All Right, Joe. It's an atypical Rutherford tune, which bears more than a little of the Banks touch, I feel. So much so that, again, being that it's kind of a torch song, piano song, I really thought it was a Banks tune, but it's not. That's Rutherford.
Hmm.
Wonderful vocal on it. Phil really paints a picture on this song for me. I love the dynamic flow from the verses to the refrain. Mix is somewhat better here than on elsewhere on the album. It's not quite as dense. Overall, I think Phil kind of paints the picture of a bar on a space station out somewhere, way out there in the Milky Way somewhere, because it has kind of an otherworldly feel, but it's really a guy talking to his bartender. The fade out reminds me of something. It reminds me of The Trees by Rush, and also the intro of La Via Strangiato has a very similar kind of, there's bells playing and a little, but they do it as a fade out here. So,
Oh,
and this
interesting. Yeah.
this
Yeah.
came before both of those songs, and we do know that Rush was greatly influenced by Genesis. So
Mhm.
it's possible that maybe they lifted a little bit of that texture. It's not an outright copy by any stretch, but it's
Mhm.
certainly an evocative texture. The Lady Lies. It's another Banks evil woman fairy tale. He's got a couple of those through his canon. More very tight drum work, locking in with the bass perfectly. The bass and drum interplay between Mike and Phil on this song is very impressive. Just so tight.
Killer.
Those two
Killer.
guys, talk about a rhythm section. Everybody talks about Geddy and Neil and John Paul Jones and John Bonham and all. I would put Mike and Phil up there with the best of them.
Same
When those
here.
guys when they were given the chance by the material, that was the thing. Genesis was a songwriters collective from the very beginning, and
Hmm.
they were always to the very end devoted to the song above all else. But
Yeah.
when Mike and Phil were given the opportunity to kind of stretch it, they would, and they did it very well. Um, Patented Banks organ sound from the old days is afoot in the verses, answered by the Prophet Five and the piano. Collins has few equals in the world, in the rock world, for sheer storytelling ability. Perhaps second only to Peter Gabriel, in my estimation.
Mhm.
When Collins is singing an evocative storytelling lyric, he delivers it. He did have an acting background similar to Peter, so I think he excels in that area. And that brings us to Follow You, Follow Me. Oh, Lady Lies was a Banks tune. I think I said that.
Yeah.
Follow You, Follow Me is credited to all three of them. It's that rare modern pop song that really reveals itself upon repeated listening, I feel. It rewards the listener with many layers of parts and bits that aren't always obvious. Everything supports the melody. That's an important lesson in songwriting, and the vocal, which is how great pop records should be. Banks turns in several wonderful lead breaks, and Rutherford continues his love affair with the flanger, which is all over this record and the next one.
Hmm.
And Phil's drum and percussion work, as I mentioned earlier on this song, is particularly intense and impressive.
Yeah.
So yeah, this album overall, it has its flaws. It's not perfect,
Hmm.
but it's certainly high on my list. Not just of Genesis records, but of records overall. It's a very favorite of mine.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. What a great, that was a great analysis. That was awesome.
Thank
Uh,
you.
that
I've
was
been
great.
working on it. I
I
knew I had to
enjoyed
bring my A game.
I enjoyed that, man. I enjoyed it. So I'm just going to make a couple comments, and that is that, I would say that it's funny when people review this record, it's always like this sort of like, they don't love it, but they can't diss it because it's like it's always, and to me, this is the definition of a transition album. Like it's like they are,
Oh yeah.
you said it early in your when you were talking earlier that they really were trying to find the direction. What were they going to do? How were they going to do it? And there's much more room, as they say in the DVD, on the Genesis reissue DVD. They talk about how there was more room for writing now. There was less people in the band, and there's a lot more room for them to put their ideas forward with three people. And at this point, like you mentioned, Phil wasn't quite writing as much as he would later. However, he's I always say this, you can feel his presence is getting more and more important in this band. On this record particularly, you feel it. And we talked about his singing. I mean, he sings his heart out on this album, and he does and I mean, of course, his drumming is awesome. I mean, his drumming is always amazing. I mean, Phil Collins is just a monster drummer. On things like the end, we're talking about the Lady Lies. The end of Lady Lies was it's like,
Yeah.
oh my God. And like Mike's exactly right in step with him. And Tony's doing the doom 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 doom. It's like, oh, that I just love the end of that song.
That sounded like a jam that
Yeah.
they found a home for. They went, yo, remember that thing we were playing? Let's do that right here.
At the end of this, exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it works. It
It
works
really
wonderfully.
opens up. It really opens up. And things like, I mean, Tony really, to me, the thing I'm going to get to is that the songwriting, as you mentioned, the songwriting is still A plus. I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
it's like, okay, maybe Mike is not Steve Hackett, obviously. But he's doing his best, and he's still capable guitar player. He's just not, he doesn't have the flair that Steve had, and he doesn't have the, like you said, the improvisational skills. Um, but and it sounds like a lot of these songs, it sounds like he's doing written parts, like Tony would say, "Hey Mike, play this, ding 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 ding." You can tell it's like maybe he told him what to play. Um, on things like Burning, I love Burning Rope. I just think Burning Rope is
Yeah.
fantastic.
Yeah.
Uh, oh, I just love that track, and you can feel Tony in a thing in a you can see how things are changing because Tony is, you can feel him pulling back a little bit. Whereas like something like Burning Rope could have been a lot longer. And I think he was like, I'm going to pull back a little bit. I'm not going to do this really, I'm not going to do 11th Earl of Mar. I'm not going to do all,
One for the vine. Yeah.
one for the vine. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. But Undertow also was longer because on his solo record, he has a little section called From the Undertow
Right.
that was part of that song, and he took it out and he put it on his solo record or whatever. So he's pulling, and there was a conscious effort to pull back. They didn't want to do these really long songs anymore. I think they were conscious of doing shorter songs on this record, for better or for worse, right? But that's the way they were heading.
Mhm.
Um, Many Too Many is another highlight for me. I just love, I mean, obviously I'm wearing the shirt. It's
Yeah.
that, like you said, the vocal, the melody, it's a beautiful song. Absolute, every time I hear it, I love it. And then uh Say It's All Right, Joe, for me is the song, like you said, Scenes from a Night Train. For me, it's Say It's All Right, Joe. I always feel like that song, like maybe they should have put on The Day the Lights Went Out as the B-side that could have been on this record.
Mhm.
That song's a little bit stilted as well, but I think it would have fit better. Um, but that's just my opinion. It's just my opinion. And then, like you said, "Follow You, Follow Me" was their first hit single, right? So
Yeah.
I mean, and David Henschel didn't like the song when they first played it and recorded it. He was like, "Eh, that song, you should just that
See
could."
see, a lot of the naysayers today scoff at Genesis and point directly to that song, but I'm telling you right now, they had no idea that it was gonna be a huge hit because it's the last song on the record. If you think it's gonna be a huge hit, it would have been the first song on side B or the
Yes, or
even the
track
first
2 or
the
something, right,
that you put your hit single as the lead off track
right,
when you're in that game, but as you mentioned about Henschel, he was not a fan of it either.
yeah,
And the record company, what they thought, oh, what was it? What was the song they wanted to release as the single, and it didn't even get released as a single. I think it might have been Many Too Many.
I
I
think
don't
it was
remember.
Many Too Many, yeah,
Yeah, they said so. That's the first single, right? Anyway, um, but yeah, that's there's something else I think needs to be said about. And then there were three. I honestly think those three remaining members were way more freaked out about Steve leaving than they were about Peter leaving. I
yeah,
think when Peter left, they banded together and said, "Okay, we've seen the press reports. We Everybody thinks Peter does everything. We'll show those people. We'll show them who is the power behind the throne." They got a little proud about it, and they
right,
ran right out and made Trick of the Tail.
yeah,
When Steve left, I think they were a little more freaked out because I don't think even those three guys realized what Steve actually represented to their overall zeitgeist. And I think it reveals itself in the overall sound of this album.
yeah, yeah, it's a
Anyway.
whole, like, you don't know what you got till it's gone because
Yeah, yeah.
because Tony actually was the one who says it's interesting because Mike in his book, Mike says Steve leaving was a non-event, but of course he's gonna say that.
Yeah.
Where but Tony did not say that. Tony says in the DVD, he says, "I kinda miss Steve when he left," because he said, "Steve was the guy who would support me in the weird ideas." Where
Right.
whereas Phil and Mike would always wanna go more mainstream.
Right.
I just thought that very interesting. He said that Steve could pull my weird ideas to the band, whereas, like, when he was gone, I was outnumbered. It's funny. Anyway, um,
Yeah.
so anyway, so "Follow You, Follow Me" becomes a hit, and really "Follow You, Follow Me" is just one riff, right? It's just dun 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 dun, and usually they said usually that would be one part of the song, whereas they went, "You know what? Let's just roll with this. Let's just" Phil started singing over it, and it was a groove, and like you said, he added all this cool percussion at the end, and it became like, "Oh, this is great. Like, this let's just leave it the way it is." And sure enough, they bring it to Atlantic, and they're like, "That's a hit." And it
Yep.
becomes they get behind it, and it becomes a hit, and they double their audience. All of a sudden, females are coming to Genesis shows, which never happened before.
Yep.
The love song is on the radio. You're gonna get some females. They're coming to the shows. So, so Genesis actually has a very successful tour in '78 behind this record because they have a hit single at their backs, and they got a little wind. And so just to get into the next kind of transitioning into the next album, basically they do this huge long tour, and Phil is gone for they're gone forever. They do I don't know how many dates they did, but it was a massive tour. And Phil's marriage was already on the rocks, and I guess he'd been absent for so long. He when they came back to drop him off at his house, it was empty. It was his wife had left with the kids, and it was a dark house. Um, and so he had nothing to do, so he starts doing Brand X again, and then he starts writing songs because he's got nothing else to do. And then starts making demos for songs that became Face Value. But before that, he had Tony and Mike come over and say, "Hey Phil, how's it going?" After a while, after a little break, they come back to his house, and he starts playing them these songs. And they pick a few songs, and they decide for the next album they're gonna do a couple songs from each person and then do some group songs. Cause so it's kind of heading in that direction of group. They know that the group writing is really fun and cool. So they decide that they're gonna do some of that, but everybody just in case bring like two songs. So that's so anyway, so that's kind of the run up to the next album, which is Duke. So I'm gonna head it over to you for your impressions on Duke.
Oh, I love Duke.
Oh yeah.
Um,
Oh
that's
yeah.
the short answer. I've emulated it in my own work. I adore. Uh, it makes me speechless. I have notes here, and it's a good thing because it's hard for me to express exactly how much I love this album. I
Oh
love the
yeah.
sound of it. I love the songs. I love the performances. Released 28th of March, 1980, again produced by David Henschel and Genesis. If and Then There Were Three is a band searching for direction. Duke is a band that knows what it wants and has a very clear and unified purpose in mind, and it comes across on the record. Every single moment of this album comes across as though it was purposeful and had a reason, and there was um, an intelligent design behind it. There were a grouping of minds that knew, and then there were three. Is a little scattershot. Maybe they're trying to figure it out. They knew what they were doing. Tony was using a few different synthesizers. He still had the ARP 2600. The Prophet 5 came in, the sequential circuits Prophet 5, and also the Yamaha CS80, which is a very big, bright tonality, famously used by Eddie Jobson in UK and all of his work, Jethro Tull, etc. It was also used by oh, his name is escaping me, the keyboard player that played with Bruford on his solo stuff.
Um,
Why can't I remember his name? Dave
oh,
Stewart.
that's it. Yeah.
Dave Stewart, yeah. He didn't necessarily get along with it. He was a Prophet 5 guy, but Bill had bought a CS80 and insisted on its use in the studio, apparently. So he had to use it on a few things. And plus, Jobson played on a few things on One of a Kind, Sahara of Snow in particular. But anyway, so that bigger, brighter palette, as I discussed earlier, um, the band, whether they know it or not, whether they realized it or not, it was this membrane that had to form around the Banks picture,
Hmm.
what he was composing, and even if he was playing someone else's song, the sound he was using.
Hmm.
Album opens up with a Banks tune, Behind the Lines. I love this. It just punches hard from the very first note.
Oh yeah.
When Genesis is at their best, they're emotional and they are ferocious at the same time. And this is one of those songs. Big, clear sound, great bass line, and the tone of the bass is awesome too. It's got a little bit of old school Rutherford grit from the old days on it. Phil at this point has really evolved into a consummate rock vocalist. You hear from the very first note on this, if you listen to, and then there were three and Duke back and forth several times, as I did over the last few weeks, you really hear that's the most clear delineation, other than the band approach being a little bit more unified and decisive, is Phil is just singing on all cylinders. He's just at
Oh,
his game.
absolutely.
Uh, Coming up on Duchess, which was the second piece in what is called the Duke Suite, which was behind the lines Duchess guide vocal, and then Duke's Travels and Duke's End. And originally, I believe Misunderstanding was part of that as well, and they sort of mutated that into a song. I may not be right on that, but anyway, should they have left it a big epic suite? I don't know. I kind of like that it's carved up into two pieces. It reminds me of, what it reminds me sort of the philosophy that Neil Morse has maybe adopted on some of his modern works, where he'll start out with an overture or a theme of some sort that lasts several minutes, and then he takes you on a journey. And at the end, the beginning themes are repeated in much the same way that they are on this. It's a theatrical approach, something you might see in a theatrical production or maybe even a movie. But it's a wonderful approach, and I like it either way. I actually have a version that I've edited for the suite to be one chunk, and that was tough to sequence that. because I'm so used to the sequence that it has. But
Yeah. Yeah.
anyway,
And didn't they do that live? They did the suite live, I
they
think.
did it a couple
Yeah.
of times.
Yeah.
I, I don't know if they did it on the Duke tour. I think they waited and did it later, but I don't remember
Okay.
specifically. I think you're right.
Yeah.
Then we go to Duchess. Enter the Drum Machine. For
Yeah.
better or
Right.
worse,
Right.
this is the
Yes.
first appearance of it. I like the live
Welcome
versions
to
of,
Genesis drum machine.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um, I like the live versions of this song better because you really hear Phil playing around with the other little percussion parts.
Mhm.
On the record, you only hear that do do dee, do do the basics of it. But
Yeah.
he was actually when they did that live, he did what he did on the studio version, which you can barely hear. He was playing a lot around with the knobs and mixing in the other parts of that pattern out. And when they mixed it, they left all of that stuff out. So the
Oh,
live versions
yes.
of that are much more fun, I think. But anyway,
Okay.
great evocative lyric and vocal, wonderful interaction between the drums and the drum machine. Phil should be no surprise, being a consummate drummer, had absolutely no problems at all playing along with the drum machine and making it feel natural and giving it swing and elevating it. Then we come up to guide vocal. All three of these first songs are Banks songs, by the way.
Mhm.
I love guide vocal, not the least of which, if you're if you're a man or a woman, or if you're a person, and you've ever had your heart ripped out and shown to you, and your initial reaction is one of anger and hate, then guide vocal speaks directly to you. Take what's yours and be damned.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
feel what he's saying. You really feel it. I mean, it's as evocative as he's ever gotten, maybe ever. I don't know. Very personal, emotional lyric, standout vocal from Phil.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh,
and this song, maybe more than any other I can remember, really shows off the CP70 piano to its greatest effect.
so beautiful. So
Banks
beautiful. Yeah.
Banks knew exactly what to do with that sound. He,
Yeah.
you know, he's a top five keyboard player of all time ever, top three probably actually, but
Yeah.
he knew what to do with that instrument.
Yeah.
Man of Our Times, which I love.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't. There's a very excellent cover. It was covered by Enchant on a Magna Carta tribute record back in the early 90s, I think, that was called Supper's Ready.
Mhm.
And if you have not heard that version, go seek it out. It's got Ted Leonard singing that lead vocal and just ripping it. They nailed that song very well. Big drum sound. I love the power and menace of this song. It's got some anger and some force to it. It's got a drum part only Phil Collins can deliver. Nicely layered guitar keyboard textures and Taurus pedals in bloom, in full bloom, man.
Absolutely.
I love it.
Yeah.
Next up, Misunderstanding. That's a Collins tune coming out of his aforementioned personal turmoils. Wonderful interplay between guitar and piano. More great vocals, great storytelling without sounding trite. I mean, it's a very old kind of a breakup tale, but the lyrics are well crafted and Phil delivers them with conviction and emotion, and it works for me. Heat Haze, that's a Banks song, wonderful classic Genesis tune. That could have been an outtake from Wind and Wuthering or Trick of the Tail for me.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
Yeah.
Heat Haze is
Yeah.
just awesome. More great interplay between guitar and piano, great classic Banks lyric. Some interesting note choices that sometimes sound wrong for a second until they don't. It almost sounds like, where are you going, Tony? And then you go, oh, there he is. Okay, nice to have you back.
Right. Right.
I really like that. He's not afraid to take a few little chances here and there.
I feel like an
Uh,
alien.
yeah,
Oh
exactly.
yeah, I love that. I love the stranger in an alien place. I just
Yeah.
oh, so great.
Uh, Now let's see. Turn It On Again. That's a Rutherford. Genesis Pop in 13/8. For me, this song is the birth of Genesis as a pop band. This is where it started. This is
Yeah.
Turn It On Again is the it's a dance tune in spite of the weird time signature. They make it swing and they make it, they make it work. wonderful, wonderful harmonies throughout it as well. If you really key in on the vocals, you're going to find that Phil's not just embracing his power as a formidable rock vocalist, but as also a very nuanced and textural harmony vocalist,
Yeah.
really nailing it.
Oh yeah.
Alone Tonight, another Rutherford. It's another one that could have come from an earlier album. Here is where that drum sound starts to come in. The gated sound is starting to assert itself a little bit.
Yeah.
Big strummy Rutherford guitars throughout. A little bit of an entangled kind of a thing maybe there. Great song, I love that. Cul-de-sac, that's a Banks. Big, bold, and Banksy. It's
Very
yet
Banks. Yeah.
very Banksy. Yet another throwback tune to 1976. And I love how towards the end of the song, right before it ends, they go around the circle of fifths with the chords that dun, 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 before
Yeah.
it ends up back at the right key. That's a neat little trick, and I really like those kinds of that speaks to the craft of how this record was made. I like it.
Yeah.
Please Don't Ask. That's a Collins, a precursor to an amazing solo career,
Mhm.
perhaps a companion piece to Guide Vocal. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
Very emotional, very personal. Um, Really a stretch for them at that point in a good way. Bordering on an R&B song, a
Yeah.
ballad that you
Right.
might hear.
Yeah.
So it's clear he was listening to things other than, what they were playing, which he
Hmm.
always has. Then we're
Right.
up to Duke's Travels, which is credited to all three. Stunning, powerful trio jamming with real force and purpose. Whoops.
I was gonna say, just your camera got. There you go.
Yeah.
There you go. Yeah. All
um,
good now.
let's see here. Oh, quit it. Oh, my notes are playing havoc with me. Stop that. uh, Duke's Travels,
Yeah.
Genesis at their
Yes.
absolute best.
Oh,
At their best.
wow.
Uh,
Yeah.
it stands up with all their most amazing instrumental forays. You know, back to the very beginnings when they would just go nuts. There's stuff like this all over the Lamb.
Yeah. Very.
Uh, those kinds of just driving crazy. There came a time in the band's life where the only stuff they were playing for them from the Lamb was things like the In the Cage, instrumental bits and some of the other more aggressive instrumental things from there.
Right.
Love the climax where Phil's vocal and Tony's lead synth meet and start intertwining.
Yeah.
There's
Yes.
there's a bit where they're playing around the vocal and the synth lead, and it's awesome. Um, and then Duke's End, once again, credited to all three. Nice recapitulation of earlier main themes, brings it all home. More Taurus pedals. I'm
Yeah.
a sucker for Taurus. I just love that sound.
Same here.
Ever since I first heard Xanadu, and it starts with that note, and you go, "What is that sound?"
Yeah.
And it's oh, that's a Moog. Well, what's a
Absolutely.
Moog? I
What is
gotta
that?
have one. I gotta have that.
I gotta have it. Yeah.
So yeah, that's Duke for me in a nutshell. It's just, you know, I am sad to say I've seen thousands of concerts in my lifetime, and I'm very sad to say I never got to see Genesis in any form. I didn't start going to concerts. The very first concert my dad ever took me to, and my dad he looms large in my listening habits and everything. It was a big influence in my early informative listening years. The first concert he ever took me to see was Pink Floyd in 1977. We saw him in Kansas City.
Wow. All right.
Yeah, it
Animal
was
sword.
Animals.
Yeah.
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 And I've seen thousands of shows, but I never got to see Genesis. Never got to
Oh,
see them. And I've seen Hackett a couple of times, and his solo stuff of recent years. Those shows are astounding.
yeah. Yeah.
Particularly the band he's got right now with Blundell on drums, and oh man, what a killer band. But I never got to see Genesis live. That was one of the Genesis and King Crimson escaped me through all those years. Unfortunately, it just never matched up. But
Yeah.
this is a tour, the Duke tour. I would love to have seen that.
Oh, absolutely, no
Yeah.
question. I mean,
Yep.
talk about a killer set list.
Oh,
Because they're playing all the new songs, and all the new songs are brilliant. So it's like, bring it on.
but
Um,
they were still kind of doing some old stuff too. They were still
yeah,
doing Dance on a Volcano and Los Endos at the end. And
yep, yep,
yeah,
yep.
anyway,
So Duke's what again a great analysis. So really fantastic. So I'm not going to talk too much about it. I'm just going to say that because I'm going to repeat a lot because I just I love
that's
this
okay.
record. I love this album. I mean,
Oh,
Duke is
yeah.
like one of my touchstone records. There's something about it. It's hard to put your finger on, but it's moving towards where they're going. And they're like you said, there's no gated drums, but man, the drums sound huge on this album.
Yeah.
Uh, there's not they're not gated, but there's a very much of room sound. I think Phil told David Henschel to like pull the mics back, man, because you hear those toms. I mean, like you said, Duke's Travels, Duke, Duke, that beginning of Duke's Travels.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
It's like, oh man, that
yeah.
oh man, that is so killer. Every time I hear that, I just turn it way up.
Yeah.
Um, and behind the lines is so just what a hook. And just things like Turn It On Again, where it was Turn It On Again apparently was I mentioned that I forgot to mention that Tony and Mike had done solo records right before this. So they had Tony had done A Curious Feeling and Mike had done Small Creeps Day. And I apparently Turn It On Again was a scrap from Small Creeps Day that didn't make it. And he brought it to the sessions, and it's just like, and they just that da 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 da, and once again in pure Genesis style, that was going to be just a section of a song, and they just kept repeating it. Da 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 da. They just kept it going, and like
I think too that at Phil's suggestion, that was played much faster than Mike had written it. Apparently,
yes, yes,
yeah, he wrote
exactly.
it much slower than that we know. And Phil said, let's pep that up, let's speed that up a little bit. Yeah,
Exactly. You're exactly right. I heard that story as well. That apparently, yeah, apparently it was do 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 do, and Phil was like, "Come on, do 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 do, let's
yeah,
go."
he was right.
And thank God he did that because it
Yeah,
really
he was
made it a
right.
great song. And it's what's funny is that I believe that song's in 13/8. I think is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. Yep.
So what's another funny story is that Peter Gabriel tried when they did that Six of the Best concert where Peter Gabriel came back for one show because they were helping him out because he was
13/8. Sorry.
13/8, yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a beat missing. Like so it seems like it's like a really 4/4 straight ahead song, but it's not. Like if you try to play along with it, it's weird. It's weird timing. So Peter Gabriel tried to play along with that song when he played live with them when he came back for that one show, and he kept messing it up because it's 13/8. He kept going straight ahead. It's like no, there's a beat missing. So anyway, um, I love Duke. It's a great record. I think the songwriting once again is fantastic. I love the Banks Yamaha sound, that electric piano sound, that bright electric.
CP70. Yeah.
Oh, I just love that.
Yeah.
There's something about that sound that just gets me. And like you said, some things like guide vocal where it's like kind of a bare track, but it hits you. There's something
Yeah.
about it. And Phil's vocal is just Phil's as a singer is becoming just blossoming on this album too. I mean, Man of Our Times where he's doing the me unto me and you unto you, and then he's doing tonight, tonight. I mean, he's all over the place on that song, and it's fantastic. And then
And
at the
he's
end, he's
doing
doing Man of Our Time. It's just
he's doing it on all three writers' songs, though. I mean, it's clear to me, or at least, being an outsider, I wasn't there for the writing sessions, but it seems to me that Mike and Tony, by that point, knew what they had
yeah,
as,
yeah,
in Phil as a singer. They were
yeah,
beginning to write for his abilities.
yeah,
And
yeah.
yeah, it definitely, and there's a lot of discussion about this and is it a valid Genesis record, and it's mostly to the folks who are more partial to Peter Gabriel. But
Hmm.
I'd like to point out that the split between Peter Gabriel and Genesis was not only an important part, but it was a very necessary and vital part of rock music in general, because Peter went on to do things that he could not possibly have done in Genesis, and Genesis went on to do things they could not possibly have done with Peter.
Right, right.
So I think that's a very rewarding thing to think about, because you're upset because Peter's left. Well, now we have these two wonderful entities out there making these unbelievable records.
Mhm.
Peter's solo careers absolutely without peer, but there's hardly any commonality with everything that he did and what everything Genesis did
Mhm.
after that split. So, I've always marveled at everyone's ability, everyone involved there, and Steve as well. Steve went off and had an absolutely stellar solo career.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it just shows you
So
how much talent there was in this band. It's
ah,
unbelievable.
great
It really is
songwriting.
unreal. It's unreal. And
Yeah.
but you know who won in all that? The fans.
Yes, we did.
We got a lot of great music from all that.
Yes, we
Um,
did.
so anyway, so yeah, so this is uh, definitely quite a battle. However, um, I'm gonna have to ask you, if you had to pick between the two, Scott, which one would you go with?
It would be hard, and over the years it's kind of pivoted back and forth. But for a fair number of years now, probably 5 or 6, it's Duke.
Yeah.
It really it has swung to the Duke side. I still love And Then There Were Three. I really do. There's so much to love about that album. There really is. It's
Mhm,
probably more rooted in their past.
mhm,
And I kind of feel like fans who dismiss it as not being enough like the older material maybe should listen to it again a little more closely and see if they don't maybe change their mind. But
mhm.
for me, that's the long version. The answer to your question is Duke.
Yeah, yeah, and I have a tendency to agree with my guests, and there's part of me that wants to be contrarian and go with this. I wanna
And
I
I
wanna
would not hold it against
there's
you at
part of me that wants to
all.
be contrarian and go with this, but I can't. I
And I
can't.
love that cover too.
Oh yeah, I love the cover, and
Yeah.
there are like you said, don't sleep on this album. I mean, I
Yeah.
think there's incredible moments on here.
Oh yeah.
However, I have to go with Duke. I because Duke is just it's a fantastic album. I mean, and there's just the high. I always say that I say this a lot, but I have to say it again. The highs on here are higher, and this is I haven't even opened this yet. This is the Rhino reissue with a 180-gram white vinyl. I haven't even opened because I've got my old version that I still listen to, um, but uh,
I
but I
think
have
this
to, yeah,
I think this was the white vinyl. Is it? No, the one's black vinyl.
yeah. This is my original copy. Um, and I love the label too with the when
Yep.
you see him
With
running in a circle when you put it
Yep.
on. Um, but there's something about Duke that is just another level. It feels like then there were three. They're still trying to find the path, like you had mentioned earlier. They're trying to find the path. Here, it feels like they found the path.
I
Um,
think they
you
found the
know,
perfect balance between a classic progressive attitude and a modern sound and approach. In equal measure, they found it. For me, I don't like to sound negative in any of this sort of stuff, but for me, this is the last Genesis record. I
yeah.
really, honestly, I have a hard time with just about everything that came after this.
Mhm.
There are big chunks of We Can't Dance that I like, Driving the Last Spike and the epic stuff on that record where they kind of said, you know what, we're Genesis, we can do whatever we want. So they kind of went back to that. But Duke
Right.
for me is the last Genesis album that really grabbed hold of me and then I still hold a piece of inside me.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm right there with you, man. It's Duke. It's Duke.
And the sound of Duke is better. I mean, the sound is better. Let's
It
be honest.
is. It's
Um,
cleaner, it's punchier.
Cleaner,
Same
bigger.
producer,
Yeah.
same
Same
producer,
producer. Yep.
all same
Yep.
songwriters and players, but you're right.
Yeah.
It's got a punchier sound to it.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
whatever they did, yeah, they did right.
They did it
I would
well.
I would love to have Steven Wilson remix, And Then There Were Three. That would be awesome.
Oh, I think it would be fantastic. Uh,
Yeah,
I'm going to say one last thing I forgot to say. That's it. Last
do
thing.
it.
and that is, I was such a Genesis fan that I used to collect bootlegs back when and I would go to New York all the time. So I grew up in New Jersey, so I go to New York and go to the Village, and I'd always be looking for Genesis stuff. And my friend and I, we used to love this bootleg. This is the Genesis from the live from the Mouth of the Monster, and it's live from the Then There Were Three tour. And man, the songs on here, I mean, okay, maybe the production is a little bit not as great or a little bit muddy or whatever you want to say. Here, they really, and these songs really come to life on this album. So like things like Deep in the Mother Lode
I
um,
think some of that is on that BBC box set that came out last fall.
probably.
Yeah, I've got that there because there's some really good live stuff from that era. I'm gonna have to seek that out. That was
Yeah,
cool.
Lady Lies is really good on here. Yeah,
Oh yeah,
it's really good. So anyway, but it's I mean it's the sound quality was like it was recorded in Chicago and it was broadcast on the radio or something. So the sound quality is pretty good. And the versions on there are great. So anyway, I'm a huge Genesis fan, so I like it all.
me too. I'm right
Yeah.
there with you.
So I hope, Scott, I hope you had a good time. I hope you enjoyed yourself.
Oh, this was a lot of fun. I mean, if you listen to my stuff, you're going to hear an awful lot of Genesis. In some cases, just direct ripping off. I don't care. My song here, the first song, the first full length song on Surrounded by Ghosts. I mean, you're going to hear my Genesis influence all over that. They're a big part of who I am. So I was really excited when you picked the topic for this one.
Yes. All right. Well, I thank you, everybody. If you made it this far, we really appreciate it. You must be a diehard because that's awesome. I love it. And I always say, go listen to Genesis. Go
Absolutely.
pull out Seconds Out. Pull out
Hmm.
just pull out your Genesis. Take a listen to it. And We really appreciate it. Thank you so much. I always have to say, if like and subscribe, if you like what you see, please hit the subscribe button, and so we can do more. It helps the channel, and I can do more episodes with Scott, and we can talk more about Genesis or ELP or something like that. Thanks again, everybody, and we'll see you next time on Curless Mania. Thank you. Bye bye.